Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Steve Anglin. Steve is a sustainability expert with a passion to significantly reduce the global carbon footprint. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi Michelle, and thank you for inviting me onto your podcast and giving me a platform to talk about things that I'm very passionate about. My name's Steve Anglin, and I am from New Jersey, Princeton, New Jersey to be exact. That's where the company's based. I've been in the space for close to 10 years now, and I run a company called Utopia. And what we do is we really do focus on the harder to abate sectors of industry. That sounds convoluted, so let me break it down to simpler, consumable chunks of words. So most people, when they think of renewable energy in America, at least, they think about solar panels, right? That's what they think about solar, they think about solar panels, maybe even batteries, maybe even pump hydro, because, there's Niagara Falls and there's some other ways to create electricity. And those things work, right? Pump hydro works. It's a great form of storage as well. Pump hydro is when you have a waterfall, the water goes down and it turns a turbine. That turbine then is connected to a generator. That generator generates DC electricity that gets transformed and stepped down into AC electricity that is used throughout New York State and parts of Canada. But pump hydro is tough because you have to be in a certain location, or else it absolutely doesn't help to have a waterfall thousands of miles away. So what we do is we have this technology. It's called concentrated solar power. And what's different about that, it's not very popular in the US right now. It's starting to grow. It's very popular in Spain, in South America, in the Middle East, North Africa, in Australia, in China, and places like that, especially where the climate is hotter, warmer, right? Where the sun is. And I think that explains the source. Because, in energy, or if you talk about physics and thermodynamics, you're not really creating electricity, or you're just basically moving one form of energy into another form of energy. So we're taking the sun's energy and we're making it into electrical energy, right? It's just the first rule of thermodynamics, right? So basically, we take the sun's energy, right, which we could do with solar panels, but what we do is we concentrate it into a thermal heat transfer fluid. It could be molten salt, it could be rocks, basalt, ceramic, whatever that thing is, that heats up, and we keep that hot for a very long time. And then we use that heat to create steam. That steam, then industrialized steam at 550 Celsius, it's very hot. That steam then powers a turbine, and just like the pumped hydro, or just like a coal-fired power plant, or just like a combined cycle gas-fired power plant, they all create steam. That's it. You create the steam, it turns a turbine. That turbine is connected to a generator, and then it just, that's the generating power plant, right? And then it goes into the power lines. So the concept is, how can you produce electricity without a carbon footprint, right? So that's the part, that's the climate change. That's there's a statistic. I mean, a lot of people actually don't believe in climate change. A lot of people think that it's just, whatever, a hoax or a scam or something. But what I would say to those people, and to people that even don't even know this, is that we've had satellites going around the Earth for the last 68 years. 68 years, right? And so they're tracking it. And we now, today, 2025, we have 14,000 satellites, 14,000 that are going around the Earth. So we can see what's going on with the ozone. We can see what's going on with the polar caps. We can see that they're melting. We can see the ozone's getting thinner. This is not just something made up. This is science. And we can stick our head in the sand and ignore it, or we can do something about it, which I think a lot of people have woken up and smelled the coffee, and now they're trying to do something. So what I'm going to talk about today, and the other thing that the company does in a very good way is we can use that heat to do something called long duration energy storage. Long duration energy storage. And what does that mean? We can store the sun's energy and use it when the sun isn't there. So at nighttime. All right. I think this is the problem. It's called the problem of intermittency
Mm.
of renewable energy. So renewables don't work when the sun's not shining. Typically, they don't. If it's solar energy, it doesn't. And then if it's wind and the wind's not blowing, and there's many days you have a wind drought, there's no wind, or there's cloud cover for many days, you don't have sun. So how do you produce electricity when they call, I love this term, first world, third world, whatever. We want electricity at 2 a.m. in the morning. If we have to go to the bathroom, flip on the lights, we just take it we don't even think about it, right? But there's a lot of countries in the world where the electricity goes out because of the brownouts, and they need to conserve the electricity. A lot of countries. So we're very lucky. So that's the start, and we do something. We do a lot with industrial process heat. What does that mean, right? So most things that we have in our society today, phones, desks, plastics, everything that we use, glass, is made typically through heat, where they heat something up, and then through in a kiln, it could be concrete, steel, wood, plastics. All these things are made from heat. How do you get the heat? You burn typically gas, right? The gas is burnt, butane is burned, and then it creates the heat that can be used to make glass, fiberglass. All the products pretty much are made that way. So this is also an area that needs to be decarbonized. Very difficult, because to get to 2,500 Fahrenheit, how are you going to do that without burning something, right? It's very difficult. So that's an area that we've focused on, and we can actually take the sun's heat and get it to 1,500 Celsius, which is really good, right? And we've been tested by TUV, which is a independent engineering company out of Germany, the Rhineland in Germany, and they've tested the technology and said, oh yeah, you can get to those temperatures. And with that, you can melt aluminum, you can melt brass, you can melt things that there's no way to get rid of it today without burning. So that's one way to hybridize and decarbonize really bad areas, right? So that's the tech that we have. But some of the things I'd like to talk about today, maybe because you're based in Scotland, and I'm based in the US, I think we can talk a little bit about, supply chain. We can talk about tariffs. Maybe we can even talk about, what's the relationship between the UK and the US, which is a good one, but, it's difficult. I know you guys have a new prime minister there, and you guys are very focused on clean energy and reducing your, net zero by 2050, which is a very difficult thing to do. And it looks like the US is sort of backing out of all the things that Biden had committed to. And I'm going to give you my spin on that. I think there's some areas that we need to just take a look at, right? So my issue, and I think the hot topics today, are critical minerals. So 1 in every 5 cars sold are EVs, and globally. That's a lot. If you think about it, the EVs, 10, 15 years ago, no one had one. So 1 in every 5 cars sold in the world today is an EV. How are EVs powered? They're powered with really cool, very smart lithium-ion batteries, right? Really cool things. I think Elon Musk has a lot to do with this. You got to give him the credit. He came up with it. He didn't come up with the idea, but he made it commercial, right? And then the Chinese copied. He made it open sourced, that technology. So the Chinese they're very good at that. They kind of figured out a way to do it better. And now I was in the Middle East a couple of years ago. They're doing their thing with electric cars, and in Dubai and places like that. So I think all the American car companies have committed to EVs. So what's the problem? And I'll make this as quick. Some people know about this, some people don't. And I think that when you talk about climate change, it's really more about national security, right? Because if you can't, if you can't power your own country and there's a war, right, you're in trouble, big trouble, right? So this whole process of having distributed clean energy that you can control on your own land is a good idea, right? If you're taking gas from Russia and they decide that they don't like you anymore, it could be a problem. So this is also a sort of a better conversation than just how good is solar, right? It's more about what world do we live in today? There's going to be a war. It's not going to be fought with tanks. Who's fighting wars with tanks? It's going to be drones and really cool things with great lithium ion batteries in them. So when you talk about lithium ion, I've said this before, I'll say it very quickly again. What goes into the battery? The battery is a genius thing, right? Whoever invented it, they deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. It's a brilliant concept. But what you have is lithium, there's two countries, I think it's Bolivia and another country, I think Australia, produces the most lithium in the world. 65% of the lithium comes from there. There are other parts that make up the 60 or 100, but most of it comes from those two countries. The problem with lithium, if you really want to get into it, is that the way you mine it, it's usually mixed in with other stuff, right? And then you have to separate it. You separate it with water, and then there's runoff from that mined stuff. It runs off into the water tables, which isn't very clean or green at all. So there's issues about the mining of lithium. But lithium, you mine it in those countries, and then you can't use it. It's useless, right? You have to refine the lithium. Where do you refine it? 90% of all lithium is refined in China, right? Then you've got like rare earth materials, like not rare earth, but other materials like copper, cobalt, which makes the battery stable, right? Because lithium gets hot, so cobalt is the stuff that makes it stable. 65% of cobalt is mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, mined there. And there's issues around the mining, but most of it is refined in China, right? Which is a problem, right? And then you've got copper, zinc, other materials. Most of those come from Indonesia and places like that, right? Malaysia, Indonesia. That's where they mine it. And sometimes they refine it there too, but most of the refining is going on in China. And then the last thing is the rare earth materials, which I think Trump is talking to Ukraine about rare earth materials. Who knows about that? Well, the rare earth materials like vanadium and other things go into the actual battery, right? Without that, it can't work. I would say 90% of those rare earth materials right now are mined in China and refined in China. So there's a major, major problem. If 1 out of every 5 cars are EVs, what if there's a war? What if someone really wants to, mess up your economy and don't sell you the stuff you need to make the batteries? So I think this is an area that I think the US is looking at to kind of fix. I know Elon is building a refining plant for lithium in Corpus Christi, Texas. There's a couple of other things going on. But this is a national security thing. I think right now we have to look at the critical materials like copper and lithium and nickel and all that kind of stuff as the new oil.
Do you think it is the new oil, though?
Yeah. I think this is all my, I should disclose and say disclosure. This is all my opinion, right? Who am I, right? I'm just a guy, right? But I think I've been right on most things, so I could go back and talk. But I do think so because the demand is exploding for these materials, especially copper. The demand is exploding. It's I wouldn't say the new oil, but it's definitely in that, there's a problem mining copper because it takes years to get permits to mine the stuff. And there's a deficit. And I think the mining, the refining, and the manufacturing of these things are going to start to become a real problem, in my opinion. And then there's going to be like a little bit of a struggle for everyone to kind of keep up. And there's going to be a little bit of a supply chain issue going on with copper. I think that's the big one, in my opinion.
Okay, so how is that going to affect the supply chain to make the batteries then?
Yeah, so I think a lot of supply chain stuff boils down to cost. Where's the cheapest way we can ship it from X to Y? And I think that if you can do it closer to home, I think it becomes more affordable, cheaper. I think, you know, if you have to go to faraway countries to get that, and maybe if there's even, you know, we talk about tariffs and what does that mean. So let me just go a little bit about tariffs so that people understand. It's the tariffs. I mean, I think President Trump calls them the reciprocal tariffs. Reciprocal, and that word just means what you do to me, I'm going to do to you, right? That's what reciprocal means. And I'm going to go back in history to the 1940s after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why these tariffs are like that is because Europe was bombed down to nothing. Dresden, parts of London was just like finished. Japan, China, all these places were all bombed down. So they needed to build it back up. We had money. We were doing great in the US. So we said, okay, you know what? We'll pay you tariff money, and so you can fix up back your country. But that was what, in the 1940s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now those tariffs, no one's ever touched them. You know, like all the presidents have come in, they've just left it alone. And now you're. I mean, I've been to Europe, right? I've been to all over the world, and I don't see any American cars. Have you seen an American car in Scotland? No,
No.
absolutely. And how long have you been in Scotland? Your whole life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever seen a Chrysler, not a Chrysler, but a Ford? I know you have Ford over there, but it's
Mm-hmm.
English. But have you ever seen like a GM truck of, you know,
No.
like a big, no, a Buick? No, because the tariffs are so high, they would make it too expensive. A Cadillac or something like that. You know, you never see it. Plus the roads, what do they call them in Scotland? The carriageways.
Mm-hmm. Dual carriageways, yeah.
Carriageways so small they probably couldn't fit on there. But well, I think the idea is our products are not being sold in those countries. And it's not because people don't want, everybody wants a Jeep. They're great. I love Jeeps. The Jeep Wrangler is one of the best cars in the world, right? The new ones, they even have EV ones as well. But you can't get them in Europe.
Mm-mm.
You can't get it, right? And it's not because people don't want it. The demand is there. It's just the price and the tariffs. So Trump is saying, look, if you're going to charge us, we're going to charge you. And it gets a little bit, I wouldn't call it reciprocal tariffs. I'd call it, if you want to just take the politics out of it, I would call it a proportional tariff. That means, you know, what you're going to charge me, I'm going to charge you. You charge me less, I charge you less, whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back into political things that I'm not even going to talk about. But to answer your question, I think there is a knock-on effect from this supply chain and you know, the technology becoming either more expensive or more affordable. I think that's definitely part of the problem. And I would say also the other thing is when you talk about rare earth materials, or you talk about clean energy, things like this, I think it was in 2023, 85% of all power plants built in the world were clean energy power plants, whether it be solar farms, 85%. So we're not doing the things like for mining copper and all these things. It's just very hard to get. It takes 16 years to get a permit. And the Chinese are way ahead. So if it takes 16 years just to get a permit to build a mine, I think there's a lot of issues that once you start to scrape under the surface, you start to see a lot of worldwide problems. And no country is an energy island. You know what I mean by that? Like, I know that there's this America, blah, 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 but it's very, very difficult to be an energy island like England or the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you have North Sea oil, you're not an energy island. You still depend on gas coming in from other, because you shut down all the coal. So now you need gas from other places. And I think that also becomes a problem, right? And then you're tied into natural gas prices from other parts of the world, you know. So if the prices go up in Germany, the price is going to go up in the UK. Mm-hmm. It's got nothing to do with you, right? Maybe something happens in another place and all of a sudden the prices in the UK go up, but what did you know, so this whole concept of importing natural gas, and this is a little bit of a tariff war going on right now, just to talk about current issues, Like I think just yesterday, I think the Chinese said they're not going to import any more LNG from the US. They're going to get it from Canada.
Okay.
So this is, it's a little bit of a tit for tat. I think peeing on trees is a good analogy. But honestly, I think that they can't keep it up. It's going to affect both countries. So I think they're going to get in a back room somewhere and figure it out. And that's what I think should be done. It shouldn't have gotten to this point. I mean, everyone's got their way. If there's a problem, take a couple of guys, go in a back room, leave the prices the same, and figure it out. I mean, this is a little bit of country-based strategy. I'm not sure that really works. I think that there's a lot of issues in Europe when it comes to electricity prices. Again, look at Germany. They got rid of all of their coal, but now they're realizing that, you can't be. So I'm a clean energy guy, just to say that, right? Renewable energy. But there is that intermittency, and if it's dark and cold for a long time, you need on-demand power 24/7, right? So what we have in the US is a lot of solar farms and things like this, wind farms, and sometimes they are lower than their capacity or maximum production, what they're supposed to produce. So you need a backup for that. And that backup is usually natural gas. That's going to always be there.
Do you really think that we will be able to have power 24/7?
But clean power?
Yeah.
Okay, 2025, I would say very difficult, right? What we do, I mean, think of the scale. We're talking thousands of gigawatts here. So what I would say is, if you boil it down to microgrids like that, there are certain countries that have a lot of islands, like the Philippines and Indonesia. It's hard to build a power plant on all of these islands, right? So I think the concept that's going to win is microgrids. And can you make a microgrid 24/7? Yes. I mean, I visited a tribe in Northwest America, just north of San Francisco, north of Sacramento, if I remember. And they have their own microgrid. It's a little town. It's on a tribe. In America, they have their own reservations. I don't know the correct term for that. And the correct term, I think, is First Nation or Indigenous. I don't know what the correct term is, but they have their own microgrid, and they're very good. They built it themselves, but it's not green. It's not 100% green. They have solar panels, but they have diesel gas, and then they have DC batteries, and then they have and it comes to about 5 megawatts of electricity. And that's what they power. And they're backed up to the grid too, but that's how they power their city. It's with their own microgrid. So you can take that concept and do that to have 24/7 in other places like these small islands in the Philippines. Now, I think our technology focuses on 24/7, right? The big deal is nighttime, or the peaker moments when people get home from work. They're cooking, they're washing, they're using electricity or gas to heat up the water, and then, or whatever they're doing. And that happens between 6 and 9 p.m. when the sun is really not there. And that's when you need, and the demand is up there and the load is, they can't, you can't. So what we have, it's like wasteful, but we have power plants that we just switch on just to handle those peaker moments. There's peaker moments from 6 to 9 in the evening, and then in the morning, when people wake up, there's a lot of demand for electricity. And then in the middle of the day, the demand goes like this, it goes down. But in solar, the actual amount of electricity that you can get goes higher, and there's something called a duck curve. So it starts like this, it goes down in the middle of the day, so it goes down in the middle of the day, and it goes up in the evening. It's called the duck, and that dip is called curtailment. What does that mean? And again, let me explain this. So in the middle of the day, the sun is the highest, right? But the demand is the lowest, right? Because who needs solar power when the sun's out? You don't use the lights. You don't really need that, right? It's when the nighttime comes, everyone needs the lights and stuff. I mean, for air conditioning, you do need it. But the demand is low in the middle of the day. That is called curtailment, and the sun is the highest in the middle of the day. So all of this wasted energy, I think there's a whole movement to store this and then use it in the nighttime. So that's called curtailment. And you can store the sun's energy in batteries. You can store the sun's energy in our technology, which is thermal energy storage. And this is not concepts, right? There's actually power plants in Augusta, Australia. I think China just built 30 CSP plants last year. 30, right? 30 plants. And they're all in the 100 megawatt range, right? I would say 50 to 150 megawatt range. So they've figured it out. And CSP started in America about 15 years ago with Ivanpah, and there's some plants that they didn't really, they were more like job programs, like these power plants, Ivanpah, which is in Nevada, California area. There were 3 towers, power towers, and it didn't have storage. The capex was really high. The levelized cost of electricity was very high. And it was more like a jobs program. It was under the Obama administration. So, but what they did is they started something. They did it first. It didn't work. A lot of the companies left the US and went to other countries like China, Israel, Spain, there are a couple of countries in the Middle East, North Africa, and they did it there. They took their lessons learned and then they made it better. So now, 15 years later, CSP works. I was in COP28 in Dubai, in UAE, and I actually visited a concentrated, it's called a polygenerational plant. So you have photovoltaics, a lot of them, call it 100 megawatts, right? Really big solar farm. And then right next to it, you have a CSP power tower, another 100 megawatts, right? So why would you do that? So right now, we know that the cost of electricity from solar is probably the cheapest in the world. It's 1 to 2 cents per kilowatt hour, very cheap, because the sun is free. Once you built the panels, that's it, right? You just have to stick it into the grid, connect it to the grid. So it's very, very affordable. I mean, obviously, it gets higher once you start, but it can be as low as 1 to 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So nobody can beat that. Coal is 3 to 4 cents, right? And coal is cheap, but solar is even cheaper, and wind as well. Wind isn't as cheap. So during the daytime, you can't touch it. It's just the cheap. Everybody knows that solar is very cheap. That's why it's been future-proofed and people use it. But at nighttime, it isn't that cheap. So what they did in the Middle East, they have a PV plant during the day to produce electricity, and then at night they use concentrated solar power, which can get you, I'm not going to give you the price of the electricity, but it's much cheaper than lithium-ion batteries, right? And that power tower, so when you look at the weighted average of the levelized cost of electricity, it's a lot lower than using a battery that is very expensive, $150 to $250 per watt. That's expensive. That's really, and plus the batteries are millions of dollars. So, once you start to look at what's the unit cost and levelized cost, it doesn't even make economic sense sometimes. So this is another area that people need to focus on. So I want to talk about net zero. I don't think we can get to net zero that easily. I think that's the goal that everyone said, let's get to net zero, 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, reduce the temperature of the earth. I think it's going to be very difficult, especially with the US going back and forth with how we're producing LNG and oil. I don't think, people are looking at the short term, sort of the myopic. Let's make money now. Let's be, but they're not thinking down the road 20, 30, 40 years from now, the effect on the environment, So I think there's some issues there. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I was about to say, do you really think it is going to be really hard to get to net zero?
Well, the energy mix, in my opinion, will be, if we could get there, probably be like 85%. I don't know, it's 2050, 2060, it'd be 85% renewables, maybe 10%, or maybe even higher than that, nuclear. They're going to have oil and gas around. I don't think that's going to ever go away. So we're not going to get to 100% net zero. I think, like I said, Middle East, they mine, they're going to have oil for the next 100 years, 150 years, oil, lots of it. They're swimming in oil, right? And that's going to make them very rich. But the demand for oil may go down, right? So they're not stupid. They're smart people. They're like, you know what? Let's understand what we can do with this oil so that the demand stays. And so they've looked at this stuff called hydrogen, right? Green hydrogen. So they can make hydrogen or methanol from the oil and gas that they're drilling in the Middle East. And there's a demand for that. So if you think about hydrogen, right, which a lot of people are talking about hydrogen, if you look at the periodic chart, you know, everyone saw that in chemistry, hydrogen is the smallest element on the periodic chart. And it's very, very tiny. But when you, as a gas, so you think about butane, propane, gases, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can actually burn it as a gas, and it burns, right? And you can use that as heat to power turbines. And the beauty of this gas is that the only offset you're going to get is water, which is clean, right? So that changes the game, right? So now you don't have to use a gas that causes hydrocarbons, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxides, all that bad stuff going into the ozone. You can have something that you can burn and it's clean. Hydrogen.
Yeah.
That's the beauty. That's the good side. The bad side is it's very hard to make. For every today, right today, for every ton of hydrogen that's made today, the way they make it with brown fuels to make the hydrogen, you get 2 tons for every ton of hydrogen, 2 tons of methane. 2 tons of methane. Methane is worse than carbon dioxide. It's 80% worse than carbon dioxide methane into the atmosphere. So it's very difficult to make hydrogen. So the whole concept of clean hydrogen, we can do it. Green hydrogen is the term, green. It can be done, but then you start to look at the economics, and then the levelized cost of hydrogen is actually per kilogram, right? It's actually high. So they're trying to get it down to $3 per kilogram, then it makes economic sense. Yeah. And then you'll see more of that. It doesn't make sense for cars, in my opinion. So the only country that really doubled down on that was Japan with the Toyota hydrogen fuel cell car, blah, blah, blah. It's not working out, right? Because they weren't first to market. Tesla and all these other battery, what's the name of the Japan company, because of P, they make batteries, right? And I think batteries are going to win for small cars, medium cars, SUVs. Where fuel cells come in and will win is with ships, trains, and maybe even trucks, because they go a long way, and, it can fill up. And I think that's where hydrogen will play a role there in those industries, and for industrialized businesses, that need heat, they would use hydrogen. It makes more sense. And the other thing is, I know that a lot of places in America, we have these hydrogen hubs all over the country. They're trying to figure out how to make the hydrogen and how can we use that to heat homes. Hydrogen's so tiny that you can't put it into a pipe. It'll just get out. It'll sneak out, or it'll crack the pipe. And it's a little bit flammable, right? So Hindenburg. Yeah. So what you have to do is blend the hydrogen. You have to blend it with natural gas, and then they call it blended, and then you can use it. So I've seen homes that have blended hydrogen and natural gas. So can we get to by 2050? I would say I would like to think we could get there, but you can't predict who's going to be in power, especially in America. And if that's not the primary goal of that administration, then it's going to be very difficult to get to 2050 if America's not leading the way. I'm not saying that Europe can't lead the way, but we're the only country that can really stay up and catch China because we got the money to do it. That's it. We can compete with China and maybe even beat them. Our economy right now is larger than China's, but it's just very difficult. If the U.S. is not on board with the net zero by 2050, then I think it's been very hard. I think nuclear, and this is the part where, and this message, all right, so where the United Kingdom and where US have synergy is with nuclear. Nuclear is clean.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about building more nuclear plants that are smaller reactors and are clean and safe. The problem with that is that, you ever heard of this term called NIMBY?
Yeah.
They're not in my backyard, right? So nobody wants a nuclear power plant. I don't care how clean you say it is. The first thing you think about a nuclear power plant, you think about Chernobyl, you think about 3 Mile Island. People don't want that in their backyard. So I think that's an issue.
I was going to ask you, do you think that American, especially your president, Mr. Trump, do you think that his stance on net zero will have a knock-on effect on the rest of the world?
Okay, so what I'm going to say to you is something a little bit bigger than Mr. Trump, right? President Trump. I think that 95% of businesses around the world, international business, have baked in net zero as part of their DNA, right? That's going on in America, right? Companies, corporations, and they're big as hell, right? Hundreds of billions of dollar corporations around America are sustainable. They want to be cleaner, greener, and more sustainable. And that's part of their DNA, how they move and do business going forward. It doesn't matter who the president is. This is what they're going to do, because that's bottom line. People, the new generation, the younger generations, they don't want dirty stuff that's made in a dirty way. They want it to be done as sustainable as possible, right? And business is smart. The markets are smart. They know if you're not doing, if you're burning lignite coal to make their cool clothes, Nikes and Lululemon and Patagonia, they don't want that. People aren't going to buy it. So what drives that net zero or model is profits, P&L, right? Right. And so the president can say, I want to be America first. Net, we want to drill, baby, drill. That's the government, right? It's different than corporations that are global and actually make stuff in China and make stuff around the world that are American companies, and their market is global. So they're saying to themselves, you know what? We absolutely want net zero to be part of our DNA. It's part of us. And then we want the world to know that, regardless of where we make it or for an American company. So yeah, the knock-on effect from pulling out of all these COP stands for Conference of Parties, right? All these Conference of Party agreements. I think there was one in Scotland it's COP 26 in 2021. So you know about this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think your question is, will we get to net zero by 2050? I don't know. Will the effects of the US president today have an effect on that? Who knows? Because in 4 years, there's going to be another election. Actually, there's going to be one in 2 years. It's called the midterms in America. So you know. And if things are going really bad, say this tariff war hasn't ended and prices are going up and people are feeling it, they're going to vote in a different Congress and a different Senate. And then they will, because the way American politics works is 3 branches of government. So there's the president, the executive branch, there's the judicial branch, and then there's a Congress, right? Judicial really doesn't count, but the Congress is split into the Congress and the Senate. If those go, say, the other direction, it's going to be very difficult for a lot of the Trump policies to be implemented. And it could change things. In another 2 years, you have a different administration that could be more like the Biden administration, which is more pro clean energy, green energy. Yeah, it's a little bit complicated. I think there are parts of the US. I think everybody in America cares about pollution. Everybody, right? So I don't think it's a red or a blue. It's a green, right? And I think that when I speak to people in the middle of the country or different parts of the country, I always talk about pollution. How can we reduce pollution? Because that's particulate matter that's getting into people's lungs and causing cancer and all kinds of problems, right? So we don't have to make it a climate change political thing. We could just talk about something that everybody can agree on, right? And then let's reduce that. And that's what I talk about.
I think I think it's pretty, I agree with that. I don't think that we're going to get to net zero by our designated time. I don't think so. I think we might get near it, but I don't think we'll get fully to net zero at all. Because
I don't think we're going to get there either by that date. I think that China set it for 2060. I think what will change things is if we can start to tie green energy to jobs and people's livelihoods. If there are people getting really good jobs and they're doing something, say for instance, data centers are a big thing right now because everyone has their phone and all the apps and the AI that we're using on my phone with ChatGPT and all that stuff, it's going to soak up so much electricity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, can you build, how long does it take to build a coal-fired power plant or a gas power plant? It takes years and billions of dollars. So you need to do something short-term. That could be geothermal. That could be solar or even wind. I think there's a lot of pushback in the US around wind electricity. But that's another, I don't want to get into the details of that, but I think that wind is hitting headwinds. Excuse the pun. But it's becoming difficult to do offshore wind, especially on the East Coast.
I think so.
I'm sorry?
I think so too, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that's it for me. I think that what I would like to say is the name of the company is Utopia. So www.utopia.com. Please go there and check it out. My number, if you want that, I can give that to you. Maybe put it in the chat. That if you want to reach out, maybe ask me more questions and maybe inquire into what we're doing, what projects we're working on, what are some, if you want to dive into this a little bit more or find out more about initiatives in clean energy. I think this week is Washington Climate Week. So in Washington, DC, there's a lot of groups that are having conferences in the next couple of weeks. There's the Clean Energy Buyers Association. And what is that? That's where you get a bunch of companies that buy clean energy. The Googles, the Microsofts, the Apples, Meta, sorry, and all these companies in America that they buy clean energy, right? That's what they want for their data centers or for whatever. And they all get together, and then you have guys like me who produce clean energy, and then we just get locked in a room and figure it out, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a good conference. And then there's another one. This is one that's a little bit, interesting, where they have there's an association of Blacks in energy. That's another that's going on, which is a good one for networking. And there's all kinds of RE plus, renewable energy plus conferences around America. So I think the demand for green energy in the country is still there. The problem is when Trump put into effect the clawbacks on some of these programs, that the federal money isn't there. I don't think it's going to be there. It's going to be very difficult to get that money. That's what I think. But the public money or the corporate money is still there. And I don't know, but in America, we have this thing called the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually I lobbied for. I lobbied Marco Rubio, who was a senator back then for Florida, but he probably doesn't remember me. The Inflation Reduction Act is a law. It gave 10 years, if we put it right here, 10 years of certainty to the markets to know that if they invested in a renewable energy project, that they would get, it's called an investment tax credit, a federal investment tax credit, so FTIC. And it's valued at 30% of the whole. So with $100 million, $30 million, yeah, it's like off the bill kind of thing, And then and you could take that 30%. And for a lot of private equity funds and funds that invest in these types of projects, they can apply that to liabilities on their balance sheet to offset their tax or liabilities, right? So it's a tax liquidity play. I don't want to get into that. It gets complicated. But what it does, it incents these companies to invest in these projects. And what does that do? It just makes more and more projects. There's more and more money to fund these projects. And you can call it a subsidy or whatever you want to call it, but it's good. It's a good subsidy. And there's other things in that for rural areas, farms, for they call it LMI, lower to moderate income communities in America. The underserved communities, they get to, because that's where they put the coal plants, or the bad stuff is in the poorer areas, right? So this will help them to have cleaner, greener, a lot of the minority areas, which I'm a minority, right? So I really focus on that. I think the other big one is the indigenous people of America. Like, I've been to some of these places and it's really horrible. Like, the electricity they have it's really embarrassing. And I've always made a promise that if I were able to, I would do projects in some of the First Nation areas of America. So I think that's where, in my opinion, where things are going. You're right, net zero 2050 is going to be very difficult. I also think that there's some really cool, innovative technology, but I also believe that if we don't figure out how to do this properly, it then becomes a security risk, right? We got to get wars, like what are we fighting over? Stupid, right? So I think, but because energy is very closely related to national security, and also I was watching this thing on drones. Like, the next war is not going to be fought with soldiers or with tanks. It's going to be fought with like really smart drones, and you can see the drone technology in some of these drone shows. I saw one in Dubai. I was like, wow. And if you see the stuff that's going on in China, one laptop can control 10,000 drones, and they're doing all kinds of stuff that you won't even believe, like, this is real. So that technology, and the drones are not just as big as they're not this big. They're huge. They could be planes, and they could do all kinds of things. And so, yeah, the battery technology, the rare earth materials, this is a global problem. It's not just the US. It's not just Europe. I mean, I know that Europe has 2030 or 2035, they're not going to be even selling gasoline cars. But I was in Scotland in 2021. I couldn't find an EV charger. I couldn't find one in the whole of Scotland. Am I wrong?
No.
Am I right?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So that's my thing. I don't know if by banning petrol or gasoline cars, you're going to have a real problem, right? Because there's no charging infrastructure, or if there is, it's very limited. And you ramp up the amount of electric cars, which honestly, most people under the age of 30, that's what they want. They want an electric car if they could afford it, right? So they all want to be clean. It's just natural. It's just like, oh, I have a cell phone. Everybody wants one, right? So that's where the demand is going towards EVs. Like, you even feel bad driving a petrol car, like, you feel guilty.
I don't know. I don't think, especially in the UK, I remember when I think they had an advert out many years ago where they says they were going to stop producing petrol cars, and they were just going to go on to hybrids, produce hybrids or electric cars. I think a lot of people went out and bought a lot of the petrol cars. I think you couldn't get one.
Oh, really? They went out and bought the petrol cars?
Yeah.
Look, I know that. Okay, so this is the thing. In Scotland, I met some folks there, and they were 100% against EVs. They're like, "Why? I can't find a charging station. I like my old convertible Mustang, or whatever." They're very. I think the Scottish are a little different from the British English. So. And then once you get outside of Edinburgh and Glasgow and maybe even St. Andrews, it's just like where Balmoral is, forget it. There's nothing out there. It's just mountains and stuff. So I think, yeah, I honestly just believe that Elon Musk to stay out of politics and focus on cars. I think he's smart. He's a smart guy, maybe too smart. And the government is, just, it's not worth it, I don't think. I think he's so brilliant. Let him focus on making amazing spaceships to go to Mars and amazing cars and stuff like that. I think that's what he needs to focus on. And once he starts to get involved with the government, there's going to be backlash because not everybody sees things his way. And I think that it could be a problem. But other than that, I think that there's a bright future, even though our government is not 100% behind it. I think there's still a bright future for corporations, private money still going into this space. And I'm 100%. I have a saying here. Yeah, I forget the saying. It's basically about the future of the world, right? We really do have to. We have to be stewards of the future because it's not today. We're thinking about our kids, our grandkids, our great grandkids. That's what we're dealing with today. It's not just us. So anyway, I think that's it for me. If you have any other questions, I think I'll try and answer them.
No, I think that's all the questions that I have actually for today. I think I'm going to wrap it up. That's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Steve for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening and see you next week.